Hey there, Postgres fam. I am back with another edition of Office Hours. Man, it has been a minute. Went on a very successful road trip, which I guess I measure success by how much mud gets on the car versus gets on me. But I had a pretty good time driving around, and then I got back. I got caught up in some projects and whatnot, and wearing this shirt today just as a sort of double thought. This is actually from the 5 year anniversary of DevOps Days DC, and DevOps Days DC actually starts tomorrow. If you're in the DC area, would strongly encourage you to go check it out. It's one of the best communities I've ever had the opportunity to be involved in. And what just sort of struck me, I guess, or I was just thinking about this because I noticed it was today, or it starts tomorrow, and Thursday's 2 day conference. And so this was the 5 year anniversary, and this was the last one I actually went to, which was in 2019. And because, of course, as you're probably aware, in 2020, pandemic hit, right? Like everything got disruptive. I ended up moving back to Florida. So that was, so what's crazy. So this was the 5 year anniversary, and that was now 5 years ago. Was the last one I went to. So it doesn't, pandemic time is just, it's like a whole nother thing. So if you're, like I said, if you're in the DC, Baltimore, like any of that sort of DMV area, you can get to this thing. Like it's 2 days. It starts tomorrow. Should be really great. The logo actually for this year is sort of like this cherry tree gear thing that looks like a brain. Like, I mean, it is just a masterpiece. I don't know who put that logo together, but I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Baltimore DevOps one with the crab and the gears and whatnot, but I gotta say that DevOps Days DC one, man, that's a masterpiece. So that was really fantastic. But anyway, so just sort of toss this on. I was sort of looking over schedule of events and whatnot, and things going on with friends from days gone by, as they say, and so I figured I'd toss this one on. In any case, so that's not why we're here. So let's get to some Postgres questions. I got some questions. Man, I just felt these are pretty random today. Just I don't know why people are asking what they're asking out there in the world, but hey, that's cool. I'll still do my best to do my duty. And then of course bits and bobs at the end with some upcoming stuff we can talk about. So let's jump right into it. Today's first question is what was the big feature in Postgres 13? I know what you're thinking. Like, I don't know why you would want to know this. Why are you asking this? Um, so I don't know what the big feature in Postgres 13 was. I mean, I think it. I so there's two things that probably were most important in what I'm thinking of this, but this is really just because I'm doing a talk on some areas that touches on this. So I happen to know this, and nothing really jumps out at me in Postgres 13. If you had a particular thing you liked about 13, it's always like drop a comment and whatnot. But I think it would probably be either dedupe in indexes, which is a tricky one because on the one hand, I'm like, this is the greatest feature ever, right? Like best thing to happen to B trees since I don't know plus minus bread. But but the problem with dedupe is not exactly a problem, but like the thing that why it's not, just a all around like greatest thing ever for reals is it doesn't really help you a whole lot on primary key indexes, and I think that's the primary use case, for indexes in any given database is to have a primary key and have that index there. So it's not really helpful for that, right? Because everything is unique. You can't really dedupe a unique column. So outside of that, fantastic, great work, totally love it. Peter and co, like, thanks so much. The other thing I guess that I would say from Postgres 13 was maybe parallel vacuum. That was certainly nice. Like that was definitely a good thing. It wasn't exactly the huge bottleneck problem for me, even like kind of operating at scale. Like that wasn't it, or you're probably always working around it. But like it's, I mean, it's certainly a nice thing. Like it's good that it's there. So I don't know. I think it's one of those two things, but I may be totally overlooking something. I didn't like go read through the release notes. Just like, so what jumps out at you that you remember from 13? I think dedupe to me is the one that I remember, but honestly, I probably mostly remember that because when you think about upgrading, that's always one where I'm like, if you're coming off of an older release and you get to 13 or above, like make sure you are, re-indexing all your indexes in order to take advantage of dedupe. So It's more like, oh, this is costing me extra work. That's why I remember it, I think, more than other stuff. So no, but it's weird. So yeah, big feature in Postgres 13. I don't know why somebody needs to know that nowadays, but there's, I don't know, it's there. Um, okay, the questions get weirder from here. So how about this one? How can I apply the Postgres graph database to social scenarios? I really don't understand what this question is asking. I mean, to me, the answer I think is like if you're at a party and you'd like to be left alone, then what you should do is bring up the PostgreSQL graph database, and I'm pretty sure everybody will just be like, "Ah, good, okay, glad to see you're doing all right," and you will have nobody bothering you at that point. So, um, yeah, other than that, I don't know if you're talking about like doing some kind of like Postgres extension. Like, there's a few things in that space. Agents graph is like a another type of system or whatever. Um, I mean, I would say if you have like really deep social webs or whatever, like then you're talking about graph databases in that sense. One thing I would say is I usually think that that's overblown, the need for like some super deep, tree of interconnected things. We did a project a number of years back where we were designing a system to map out like students and teachers and maybe even like administrators. It was like, but it really only went like 3 levels deep, right? And even though you have this sort of like deep, this sort of wide matrix of students and teachers, it was only 2 levels deep, so it was actually pretty easy to handle in SQL. And even like graph database folks, I think, would say like, yeah, you don't like necessarily need a graph database for that type of work. So yeah, I think the best answer here is to be left alone at parties is how to apply it. Other than that, like I don't. The question is kind of whatever. Um, so we'll move along quickly then. How about question number 3? Does Postgres support the SQL case statement? And I think what you're talking about are case expressions within the select statement, because that's the only thing within SQL proper that is a case thing. So it's not like when it's not like a with query where you use like with blah 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 select all from it. There's no like case blah 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 select all from this, right? It doesn't work like that. It's select case something when this, then that, and the other thing, right? Like so you're doing it within a select statement, and it's case statement. Postgres definitely does support that. Has I don't know, for a very long time, as far back as I can remember, which doesn't actually mean that's as far back as I've been using Postgres. I just don't remember, but I think it might have been. Like I think that might have come like straight out of Berkeley or whatever. Like I might be wrong about that, but it's certainly decade plus now that it's had that in there. Um, it used to be the workaround. I feel like we were using that before we had like an actual coalesce function. And there's some other versions of that sort of if then logic that might be floating around in other databases, but certainly if you're trying to stick to the standard, the case expression in a SQL statement. And by the way, you can use that in other places, meaning like you can use it in I think the where clause and a limit clause, maybe even an order by clause. Like I don't know. I feel like you can Posts are pretty good about that, or like anything that you can turn into an expression, you can drop into other places. So yeah, definitely Postgres has that one, and you're good on that. Question number 4: how much data do you have to make RedShift over Postgres RDS the better choice? And so, for those that don't know, RedShift is at this point, well, I guess it's always been. So it's a proprietary fork of a proprietary fork of Postgres. I guess is actually how I have to explain that. It's a cloud database that is managed and maintained by Amazon. It was forked from Paracel, which I forget who owns Paracel. I don't think Amazon actually owns it, but maybe they do own it at this point. I don't think anyone actually uses Paracel. I think pretty much all the users are on Redshift now. I could be totally wrong. I'm not a Paracel expert by any means. But Paracel was a fork of Postgres, like I think maybe like 8.0 or 8.1, somewhere back in there. I think was the fork of Paracel from Postgres. And so when Redshift first came out, it was sort of like, well, here's a cloud hosted version of Paracel, and we call it Redshift. And I have used it a little bit and have done some consulting work on it. And it's kind of an interesting system. Basically, I would say just think of it as like a columnar hosted Postgres is by and large what it is. And there's definitely some other stuff in there. So go to Amazon site and read about Redshift if you want to. The query engine has had some changes. I would also say like they brought it very much more into the modern times. If you originally were using Redshift, like you knew it was like a fork of Postgres like 8 series because it was just so old. It just didn't have a bunch of stuff that you would have expected in a Postgres database. It's like pre-JSON B types and all kinds of stuff, syntax that didn't have one. So they've definitely modernized it quite a bit over the last few years. But back to the question. So how much data do you have to make Redshift over Postgres RDS the better choice? I think, again, like I think always with these questions, it's a little bit tricky because it isn't always about how much data you have, but really about what are you trying to do with it. More specifically, how are you trying to query at the data? Certainly, if you have, if you have a multi-terabyte system, but it's actually an OLTP system, then like Redshift is not going to be really great for that. It's definitely designed to handle like analytical workloads where you're doing a lot of like large number crunching, again, columnar style format right on the storage side. So I think that's the bigger question. One of the things, it used to be really good. We did a project with a company based out of Baltimore, and they really had a nice setup where what they were doing was actually replicating off of their main Postgres. And because Redshift is a fork of Postgres, like it's pretty easy to get data from Postgres into Redshift. It's a little simpler, and that's actually one of the things that's interesting. I'm surprised there aren't like one or two like really top-notch niche Redshift consultants. The thing that is, I think, difficult, I guess, in irony, it was difficult to make money off of Redshift is there just aren't that many knobs to the system. So there are a certain, sort of few best practices, and if you do those things, like, well, it's really hard to make it better, unless you maybe get into very expensive query rewriting, right? And it's just time consuming to do that. Whereas with Postgres, like every year, the consulting companies that are out there, right, they add in a good like 10 to 20 configuration parameters so that they could keep the gravy train going of like, yeah, no, you totally need us to come in and tune your system better, right? Like, anyway, so Redshift doesn't really have all that, but what's nice is that the query optimizer and executor and all that operates, even though it's like translating into a different storage format and making things work, the syntax that it accepts and what it can do with Postgres is actually pretty similar, especially nowadays, right? Again, like I said, they've modernized the SQL bit. So you can take Postgres queries that are slow, sort of analytical queries, and easily kind of just drop them over into Redshift without having to do a whole bunch of rewriting. And the company that we had worked with, that's essentially what they were doing. Like they were replicating off to a Postgres database for analytical queries, and then they started replicating into a Redshift. And they could just sort of measure back and forth, like, how much better is the Redshift one versus the Postgres one, and let's keep our queries like Postgres compatible. So if we have to go back to Postgres, like we can do that. And I thought that was some pretty decent foresight on the engineering folks that were at that company. So nicely done with them. I mean, I sort of think it's probably you're into terabytes of data. I mean, probably tens of terabytes before you really get into this. Certainly hundreds before I would think you have a problem. But again, like it really comes down to how are you querying your data, and how important is it that those analytical queries are fast. Because in a lot of cases, like if you're doing, like daily statistics on your data, and you can just sort of fork that off into a standalone system to do those queries on just pure Postgres. You run them over there, and maybe it takes an hour for those to complete. But if you're doing daily statistics, like that's probably fine. It's when you need to get those answers a lot faster that sort of becomes a thing. So worth benchmarking if you've got some queries, like it's pretty easy to make that conversion. Might take a while because of the amount of data that's involved. But otherwise, like it's a pretty easy, as lift and shifts go from one database system to another one, that's probably one of the easier ones you can make. If you can upgrade a major version of Postgres, like you can probably get it into Redshift. And I'll be honest, like I haven't looked at it in the last couple of years, so that might even be even easier. I'm I'm blanking on the the AWS, like I want to say it's called DMS, or but I think I've got that name wrong. Their sort of logical replication tool thing that they use to get a lot of data into Postgres when they're doing migrations. I'm pretty sure you can use that to get from Postgres into Redshift, or there might be some other connectors that are out now that make that process pretty easy. So, but yeah, I mean, I think if you've only got a terabyte of data, like it's probably easier, especially if you're starting with it in Postgres, right? Because we're sort of assuming that it's generated based on OLTP. If it's not coming from Postgres, it's coming from something else. That's kind of a different story, and so maybe you would look at Redshift earlier in the cycle. But otherwise, I think like you probably, I mean, you've got to at least be terabytes of data, and that's probably like on the tables in question that you're actually looking at. And realistically, like I think it's probably tens of terabytes, and certainly by hundreds. I would say you should be, just sort of evaluating on a cost thing. Certainly, if you're having performance issues. So that's the Redshift question for today. And then finally, we've got another sort of one that it's a little bit esoteric. Question 5 is: are relational databases a good choice for building an application like Facebook, which has the potential to grow significantly? And the thing I have to say here is this is a little bit more philosophical than it is technical. And the reason I say that is because when you say an application like Facebook, which has potential to grow significantly, right? So for those that are unaware, Facebook by and large uses MySQL or was built on top of MySQL. Although if you would talk to Facebook engineering, and I'm saying like a decade ago, they would have told you that if they were building the system from scratch now and understood the volume that they were going to have to deal with, the nature of the MySQL architecture they had was essentially like 1500 to 2000 KV instances with application based sharding on top of that. Right, so they're just doing these primary key lookups and making it work like that. In which case, switching to something that was a non-relational database would kind of make a lot of sense. Although they did do some benchmarking and whatnot. I think last I knew they were using modified MySQL with a MyRocks, or I guess it's a RocksDB engine, so it's kind of dubbed MyRocks. And so maybe you would say use RocksDB. But I think the problem is like you always have to figure out how you're going to get from one user to like the first billion users, right? And when you have like a billion user problem, it's very easy to say like let's go use this specific tool like that's really designed well for that, like a RocksDB, and just do that, right? Like that's a much easier decision once you have the billion thing. I think what the problem is building a general purpose system, right? Like those first versions of Facebook probably would not have fared well, where they were doing a lot of L2P and they've got to do analytics queries and whatever this, that, and the other that's getting built in the system as it's rapidly developing. And a lot of those workloads are not going to fare well in a non-relational system, right? It's just easier to get up and going and make those changes. So I would say, yes, I think they're a good choice because of that. And in fact, I would say they're not, even otherwise, they're not a horrible choice because, well, you might find that there are certain very specific databases that would work better once you're at the billion or a problem. These systems we know can be made to work. Again, you could do application level sharding and just run a ton of them, right? And if you're running them all pretty similarly, and I've seen some other use cases sort of in that vein. If you think of like all the databases that Heroku ran, and Salesforce actually did a number of databases back in the day, both on Oracle but on MySQL, and they do a lot of application sharding and whatnot. Like that pattern actually, can work. So even in the worst case scenario, like you are going down a path that you can at least tell that people have been on there. Speaking of my road trip, like at one point we were going through Talladega Forest, National Forest, and we made a few turns. One, like there's a gate, but then there's a path around the gate. So you're like, I think I could just drive around this gate and keep going. And then we hit like some trails, and we were like, well, clearly there is a trail here, but like it's kind of overgrown, and I'm not sure anyone has been here since the spring, and I don't even know. But you do at least know there's a trail. You're not just like heading off out in the wilderness. Whereas at one point, I think I was in like Oklahoma, and I took this like dirt road that I thought was a shortcut of sorts, and it ended in the middle of a field some ways down, and it was like, I think I only need to go about 2/10 of a mile in this direction to get back onto another dirt road. But I couldn't really tell what the terrain was, and there was absolutely no road at that point. And you're just like, maybe I'm pushing it a little bit too much, and it's time to go back the other way. And that shortcut isn't quite as short of a cut as I thought it was. I ran across some guys that were like fishing with rifles too, as I headed back the other way, which I thought was kind of interesting. So some guys, kids, on their BMXs. Anyways, gotta love the Midwest. So anywho, so yeah, so I mean, I would say yes. Like, go ahead and use Postgres would be obviously the choice that I would tell you to make. But I think relational databases in general are fine for that kind of a thing. I think, there are other factors that play in that. So would I use like Oracle or SQL Server? Like, no, because if I end up realizing like, crap, I got to run 1,000 of these, licensing money is real money. So I wouldn't do that, but that's sort of less about is it relational or non-relational. But I think the other benefits you're going to get of rapid development, more flexible tool in those early days to actually get you to the point where you have the billion row problem, that I think is actually worth it. So just my take on it, man. That's what I would do. So, all right. Hopefully that's useful. Again, if you've got questions or comments on my answers, you can always drop me a line. And in fact, speaking of that, let's do some bits and bobs. I did want to try an experiment. I don't know if anyone will actually make use of this, but sort of decided if you are wondering, like, hey, I'd like to get a question answered, and you're not sure how to get me a question, like, I think it's very easy, but let's make it easier if we can. Feel free to just drop me an email. If you send it to office hours at pgtreats.info, I believe I will actually get that email. So I can read your question. And if it's, up to our high quality standards, then I will be glad to answer that question for you. So give that one a shot. Obviously, there are other ways to get a hold of me, like Slack or Twitter or whatever. And I probably will pay enough attention maybe to see those. So other bits and bobs. I've got 2 upcoming trips, which involve 3 different conferences. The first one, probably the more important one, I guess, because it's earlier, is I will be in Greece this year in Athens, October 23rd through 25th. For pgconf.eu. I'm speaking on the 25th, so I know I will be there that day. We'll see, it's Greece. So we'll see how the rest of the time goes. Definitely looking forward to connecting with a couple of old friends. One in particular should be a good time. So that is, I guess, is that the last week of October? I guess technically it's not. Like there's like a whole extra week, half a week or whatever on the end of that. So, but it's late October. Tickets still available. You could go if you haven't purchased them yet. Speaking of purchasing tickets, also will be at Past Data Summit, which is like 2 weeks after pgconf.eu in Seattle, Washington. So basically on the opposite side of the globe, if you just pretend like the Southern Hemisphere doesn't exist. That is November 4th through the 8th, and I don't remember what day I'm speaking on that one. It's not the 4th, so that would mean it's either the 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th. No, it's not the 5th. 6th, 7th, or 8th. It's got to be one of those 3. I'll try to narrow that down for you if I can, and figure out which day I'm actually speaking. But they do have a schedule posted online, so you can go see that. A bunch of other folks will be there. Mom's mom will be there this year, so hoping so that'll be good to see him. I haven't seen him in a while. A bunch of other folks as well. My boy Andy Atkinson, I believe, has a talk going there, so that'll be awesome. And it should be a good time in general. So I'll be there, and if you haven't bought tickets for that one, I do have a code. It is TREATR24. You can get $150 off. I think all the other discounts are gone, so if you're gonna save any money, like that's the way to do it, I think, at this point. So hope you check that out. And then the third conference, which is I will be there on the Saturday after Past Data Summit. So the 8th is the Friday. So then I guess must be the 9th is Seagull, which is a Linux conference in Seattle. And I will be attending that. I'm not like speaking there. There is a Postgres booth, I believe. So you may find me at the Postgres booth or just wandering around seeing what's going on in Linux land. But should be a good time. Again, a bunch of Postgres folks will be there as well. So hope to see you all there. And then the last piece of news, in case you did not know, at least I believe as of this taping, as they say, Postgres 17 is supposed to be released on Thursday. That is in 2 days because it is Tuesday where I am. I'll be dodging hurricanes, I guess. I was thinking about this. Like, was it last year? Like, I thought there was a hurricane. We were getting warnings of a hurricane like last year when Postgres got released, and like I don't like that just seems like a heck of a coincidence. And then I sort of thought like actually we get hurricane. I mean, it's September in Florida, like is hurricane season. So like maybe that's actually not that big of a coincidence, and you just forgot because you moved away for so many years. So, um, but I will try to be online, posting on Twitter or whatever, and trying to sort of coalesce my list of here's my favorite features of Postgres 17. Like my favorite feature is totally obvious. Well, I mean, maybe it's not obvious, but it's clear like there's a number one in my mind of like this is the best feature ever for Postgres 17, and you definitely should be upgrading to Postgres 17 if you can. But I will talk more about that in a future video. Getting what is the other four of like a top five has been a little bit more difficult, but we'll talk about that once it's actually released. Again, it should be Thursday, unless something pops up. And otherwise, I don't know. I will see you folks online. I hope you're all doing well out there. As always, feel free to contact me if you have any questions or have comments or otherwise just need to discuss something. It's fine. Until next time, then, I guess take care of yourselves. And of course, if you can, take care of your databases as well. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.